Humans have sailed the oceans for thousands of years, and for just as long, they've told stories about what lives beneath. Not fish, not whales, monsters. Creatures large enough to swallow ships, old enough to predate the gods, and dangerous enough that entire civilizations built their religions around keeping them asleep. These are the most dangerous sea creatures in mythology, from every corner of the ancient world. We start with the one that terrified the ancient Greeks more than any god, Charybdis. She wasn't a creature in the traditional sense. She was a living whirlpool, a massive mouth beneath the surface of the sea that opened 3 times a day and swallowed everything above it. Ships, men, cargo, all of it pulled down into a spinning void. In the Odyssey, Odysseus had to sail directly past her, and the only reason he survived was because he chose to lose 6 men to the monster on the opposite cliff, rather than risk his entire ship in the whirlpool. That other monster was Scylla, a 6-headed serpent perched on a rock face across the narrow strait. Each head struck independently, snatching a sailor from the deck before anyone could react. The Greeks placed these 2 creatures on opposite sides of the same passage because they wanted to teach a specific lesson. Sometimes every option is fatal, and all you get to choose is how much you lose. The Kraken came from Scandinavian folklore, described by Norwegian fishermen as a creature so massive it was mistaken for an island. Sailors would anchor on what they believed was solid land, only to feel it shift beneath them as the thing woke up and dragged everything down. Early accounts describe it as a giant crab or octopus with arms long enough to pull a full-sized warship below the surface. The Kraken was feared not because it hunted humans, but because it didn't care that they existed. It surfaced, it fed, it sank, and whatever was above it at the time simply disappeared. Some historians believe Kraken stories were inspired by real encounters with giant squid, which can reach over 40 feet in length. But the myth was always bigger than the science. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, might be the largest creature in any mythology. According to Norse belief, this serpent was so massive that it wrapped around the entire earth and held its own tail in its mouth. It lay coiled at the bottom of the ocean, and as long as it held that position, the world remained intact. The god Thor encountered Jörmungandr twice. The first time disguised as a cat, the serpent was so heavy that Thor, the strongest of the gods, could barely lift one of its paws off the ground. The second encounter was a fishing trip, where Thor hooked the serpent and nearly pulled it to the surface before his companion cut the line in terror. The third and final meeting is prophesied to happen at Ragnarok, the end of the world. Thor will kill Jörmungandr, take 9 steps and then drop dead from its venom. The serpent doesn't just live in the ocean, it is the ocean. And when it lets go of its tail, everything ends. Leviathan appears in the Hebrew Bible as a sea monster of unimaginable size. The Book of Job describes it as a creature with scales no weapon can pierce, breath that sets coals ablaze, and a body that makes the sea boil white behind it as it moves. It is described not as something humans can fight, but as something only God could control. Some passages suggest Leviathan existed before creation itself, a force of chaos that had to be restrained before the world could be built. In later Jewish and Christian tradition, Leviathan became associated with Satan and the end of days. But in its earliest form, it was simpler and more terrifying than that. It was just the thing in the water that nothing could kill. Tiamat is the oldest sea monster on this list, and possibly the oldest in recorded history. She appears in the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, written over 3,000 years ago. Tiamat was the primordial goddess of the Salt Sea, a dragon so vast that when the god Marduk finally killed her, he split her body in two and used one half to make the sky and the other to make the earth. Before her death, Tiamat spawned an army of monsters to wage war against the younger gods. She created serpents with venom for blood, storm demons, fishmen, and scorpion creatures. Every army the gods sent against her failed, until Marduk rode out alone with the winds as his weapon. The world you live on, according to the Babylonians, is built from the corpse of a sea dragon. That's not a myth about defeating a monster. It's a myth about the monster being so large that the entire planet is what's left of it. The Sirens of Greek mythology killed with sound. They sat on rocky islands in the Mediterranean and sang with voices so beautiful that every sailor who heard them steered directly into the rocks. It wasn't a choice. The music overrode every survival instinct a person had. Odysseus wanted to hear their song, so he had his crew plug their ears with wax and tie him to the mast. He screamed and begged to be released the entire time. His crew couldn't hear him. That's the only reason any of them survived. What makes the Sirens more dangerous than creatures with teeth and claws is that their victims went willingly. They didn't die afraid, they died wanting. Umibōzu comes from Japanese maritime folklore. It was described as a massive, dark shape that rose from calm seas without warning. A featureless humanoid form made of black water, sometimes described as the size of a mountain. Sailors reported that it appeared on still nights, rising slowly from the surface, and that once it was fully above the water, it would smash the ship to pieces or drag it under. Some versions say the Umibōzu would ask for a barrel, and if you handed one over, it would fill the ship with water until it sank. The only way to survive was to give it a barrel with the bottom removed. Umibōzu represented something the Japanese understood about the ocean better than most cultures: that the sea doesn't need a reason to kill you. Sometimes the water just rises, and there's nothing underneath it that you can bargain with. Humans mapped the land thousands of years ago, but the ocean is still mostly unknown. Over 80% of it has never been explored. Every culture that has ever lived near the coast invented something horrible to explain what they couldn't see beneath the surface. Maybe they were wrong. Or maybe the reason these stories survived for thousands of years is that the people who didn't believe them never came back to argue. Subscribe if you want to see every underworld in mythology explained next. And tell me in the comments which sea creature you think is the most terrifying. I'll see you in that video.